Yeah, I've got
Good.
recording on my little button.
Yeah, it says recording.
Good, we're recording, we're live. Well, not live, but we're recording. Good afternoon, everyone. It's Wednesday, the 8th of April. Time stamping it because things are moving so quickly and it's useful to know where we are when we recorded this. Join this afternoon for our weekly funding update with our resident funding experts and, of course, Robin, our business turnaround recovery expert. So Nick Rotton, Dave Marshall, Robin Johnston. Idea for today is just to get your views from the ground of what you're seeing on the front line, how you're seeing changes in banks' attitude, what's shifted since the government made the announcement last week on freeing the funds up, and yeah, what clients can expect to be finding if they're applying for funds.
Okay, shall I kick off?
Please, yeah.
So I think after the changes that we saw at the back end of last week, Friday, latest stats I've had, 291 million of loans have been agreed and I believe drawn down. That's about 2,000 applications. So, that's quite a big number in a relatively short period of time, but then as a percentage of businesses are actually looking for funds, it's probably quite a small number. I think the scheme rule changes most people are aware of now, they're well publicised. One of them's had a probably slightly unintended consequence, and that's that the banks officially now, or anybody in the scheme, can't ask for a personal guarantee if the loan's for less than £250,000, which is generally good, albeit it's where the clearing banks were anyway by the end of last week. As far as the alternative finance market are concerned, where they raise funds from institutions and any funds they can get their hands on basically to lend out, very often the terms that they have those funds to lend on require them to take a personal guarantee. So it's actually knocked them out to some extent of being able to use CBILs. Now I imagine they're going back to their institutional lenders and saying, can we change the terms? And they're probably going back to the British Business Bank saying, that's a bit of a problem for us because you're actually cutting off a strand of finance that we can put into business. So that's still ongoing, and it's caused some of the lenders who would otherwise have applied to the British Business Bank to become part of the CBIL scheme to actually pause their applications. So that's still ongoing. We may see some more changes there. But generally, I think for most businesses applying to the High Street Bank, it was a good news story. And I think that one of the big problems is, as we already anticipated, just the volume of businesses trying to get those loan schemes through. I think it was NatWest this morning mentioned that there were, in their call centres, which were geared to take in about 3,000 calls a day, they were receiving 25,000 calls a day. So if anybody's having a bit of a problem getting through, that kind of puts that into context, and I expect that's replicated amongst lots of banks. Definitely,
that's tremendous, isn't it?
Yeah. As far as the comments that we've heard on high interest rates, nobody I've spoken to has actually seen an offer of funds at a particularly high interest rate. I was just on a webinar earlier today, and the reference was made to high being regarded as double digits, so nobody had seen anything to double digits. The lenders that might be in that double digit sphere are probably some of the local funds operating on a regional basis, which are part of the CBIL scheme, and their interest rate would ordinarily reflect the fact that the loans that they do are generally high risk in the first place, but also they have a high cost of funds as well. So pre-COVID, they were probably lending at 16 to 17%, or 12 and 14%, that sort of area. So yes, it looks high compared to what we're used to in the clearing bank world, but it's not necessarily high compared to where they were previously.
Okay. And what about information requirements? Because they were last week seemed very varied from bank to bank. Some people just wanted a cash flow in your last year accounts. Some people wanted full asset and liability statements and integrated business plans.
I think that's always going to be variable because you've got different banks looking at different businesses seeking different amounts and different levels of complexity within those businesses. So I don't think there is going to be one size fits all for that. Okay. I think as far as making your application is concerned, it's not all about being first in the line. It's about being first in the line with the right information. And bearing in mind, right information is a judgment call. I would err on the side of more information than you anticipated. So don't assume the bank can manage without something. Assume that the bank will need and provide that information, because having the application thrown out of the process, come back to you, ask for more information, then go again. It's going to take even longer.
Of course it is, yeah. So what you're saying there is it's not so much that the banks are differing between what they're asking for, it's about complexity of lend and the risk of the business and the circumstances. That's where the variability comes from.
And the amount of lend compared to the size of your business and what sector you're operating in. It just goes on and on, really.
Yeah, sure. So people can't expect to find any sort of blanket requirement. It's going to be very tailored to what they're looking for and who they are.
Yes, what I'd suggest is within the application forms, most of the banks have got an application form. Within those applications, there are some key question areas. And on some of them, there's a relatively small box. Well, very often you're not going to be able to get the information you want to in that box. So supply some notes, detail the assumptions that you've made, detail the actions that you've taken. If it doesn't actually ask you the question, still give the information, because it's going to be far easier to give that information up front than deal with a second request later.
Brilliant, that's great, thank you.
I think the other thing to bear in mind, Serena, is that clearly where the business is slightly more complex, the client may already have an FD or an in-house accountant, so producing the information required will be going to probably more experienced business manager as well.
Yeah.
So the likelihood is that whole process should be quite swift. We had a client talking to David Griffiths today, and they were able to produce the information, fill in the application form, and submit it within a couple of hours.
Yeah.
The challenge we see is in that slightly smaller business marketplace, or where the borrower hasn't needed to borrow before.
Yeah.
So they're in an area where the manager may well have 500-600 connections within their portfolio. Now, if you take a percentage of that, if they're getting 10-15 applications a day, they may well not be spending a huge amount of time, or won't have the time to be able to really drill into all of those boxes. So the client, the borrower, the guys listening to this have got to almost spoon feed them the information they need.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
You know, you can't assume that they know you. I think that's the crucial bit. You can't assume that because you're thinking that they will understand that you've gone through whatever process.
Yeah, got it. That's really useful.
Yeah, I was on a webinar this morning talking about restructuring and refinance options, and it was mainly lawyers and accountants on the webinar, and the experiences that were being shared indicated that there was a variation not just between the banks, but actually down to individual relationship managers within the banks, which and that's suggested, going to David's piece about the question of the bank's experience and ability to respond to customer inquiries and to applications. Banks, especially the clearing banks, you know, they can be really big beasts to move around, and to deploy a new product rapidly, to put in place the criteria, the policies, and you know, get the credit committees and so on ready for underwriting, can be a massive task for some of them. So I've had, in the last week, I've had examples where HSBC were able to agree an application that had been made. Oh, there's a funny noise there.
There is.
Is that me or you?
I don't know.
No,
Carry on.
Yeah, HSBC had an application on Friday, and an approval was put out on Monday for a lend of 250,000 at 2.6%. No personal guarantee. Another one, Royal Bank of Scotland, £700,000, application on Monday, approval on Wednesday, 2.6%.
That's really fast approval, isn't it? Really fast.
Yeah. So really fast rates. But then on the other hand, I was talking to a client a couple of days ago who is worried about their business, and I said they've got a big order book, but they can't. All of their clients have kind of put off or delayed the orders, so they will go through, but not for a couple of months. So they've had to furlough everybody, and they looked at CBILs, went to their bank, NatWest, and NatWest said, no, we're not going to be able to help you at all. the only thing we can offer you is a £50,000 overdraft, and we want personal guarantees from the directors for that. So it shows not just between the banks, but also, I think, between the individuals in the banks and the individual relationships, quite a wide discrepancy. And that will probably narrow, but it's there for the time being.
David and Nick, are you seeing any increase in the speed of processing since Friday? I mean, I know it's only been a few days, but have they been able to speed things up at all?
I think they're putting more and more resource into it, but to some extent, probably in the early days, they only had the very early first few applications, and I guess now they're coming in by the shed load. Yeah. So I think I know they're putting more and more resource in. I know of individuals that have been pulled from business development into processing positions, but there's only so much they can do.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, I would only concur with that, in the sense that, you know, there are only so many members of team that they can drag from elsewhere to be able to, you know, sensibly still deliver the right decisions. At the end of the day, that's what everyone wants. So I think it's important to just sort of, you know, remain patient. But clearly, the crucial bit is coming back to what David was saying earlier. You know, if the application needs filling in full, fill the application in full. Don't complete it thinking, well, they only need this bit of information. Yeah. Fill it all in, because you don't want to be toing and froing in this current regime. You know, if it asks for 2 years accounts, provide 2 years. If someone else is only asking for 1 year, if the application in your bank says 2, give them 2.
Yes.
I think it's stating the obvious stuff, but it's also trying to help your case get through that bit quicker.
That's really good advice. And how quickly are you finding of funds flowing after approval?
I think in most instances, especially now that additional security is not being taken, it should be a relatively quick process. So within, you know, again, depending on workloads, but it's not in so much a function of the amount of work that's got to be done from agreement to drawdown. It's probably the number of loans that are trying to get from agreement to drawdown. Right. So I don't think it's anything other than probably volumes that are slowing things down. But you know, ordinarily, it could be within the course of just a few days, really.
Okay, so a few days, and is that what you're seeing now?
It's early days, and I think the early ones, again, there was less volume around, so quite quick drawdown.
So maybe take a bit longer as we get busier then.
Yes, because the loan agreements themselves will have to be documented, and I'm sure there will be some signatures required in various places. So it is going to take a little bit of time.
That's really good advice. Okay, and of course, there's nothing changed on Friday about the viability. That's obviously always going to be a key consideration. Lots of businesses out there don't have that viability, and they can't make March and April payroll. Robin, are you seeing this coming through yet? People who just haven't got anywhere to turn for funds?
Yeah, actually, this leads on to a question that I was going to ask the guys. At the moment, we're getting inquiries from companies that are concerned that they won't make payroll, or they won't be able to meet next month's payroll. And their concern is, it's all very well saying that this money is on the way, but if our bank, if we were in trouble or considered to be in decline before COVID hit, then how likely is it that the bank's going to support us going forward? And in fact, one of those clients was the one. They're not actually in distress. They've been climbing out of a distress situation, and they're kind of three years of growth, and then this happened, and it was clear that the bank still wasn't confident in them. So we're seeing more inquiries of that nature, but at the moment it's still businesses that probably weren't completely viable before COVID-19 and are now just in a particularly accelerated stress position. And what their options are for refinancing. And that kind of led me to, or leads into the question that I wanted to ask the guys. There hasn't been much talk yet about the banks accepting new applications from businesses that aren't existing customers. Yeah. But in circumstances, for instance, where a clearing bank might say, actually, given the stress on our portfolio at the moment, you're not one of the businesses that we would consider core or want to support further. and while they wouldn't necessarily reduce facilities or put a stop on facilities or anything like that, they may well discourage any further lending, so that the client actually has to think about looking elsewhere. But so far, I'm hearing that there isn't an opportunity for customers to rebank, even to challenger banks. And I wanted to know what you guys thought about that.
Okay, I'll say that. The instructions and the guidance are that everybody goes to their own bank first. That's just where the track record is, the history is. The accounts are already open. Lots of good reasons why you should go to your own bank first. If your existing bank isn't able to help, then trying at this point where everybody's totally stressed out, nobody's got any time to do anything other than process CBIL's applications, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to move from one bank to another. And in fact, moving security, particularly if it's property security, from one bank to another, has got its own challenges at the moment. In fact, I pretty much say it's not going to happen. So that really leaves somebody with their existing facilities, with their existing bank, but needing more capital. And that's where they could perhaps turn to the alternative finance sector. It's out there. Not all the lenders in the alternative finance sector are lending at the moment, but some of them definitely are. So the benefit of that is it's a facility alongside existing facilities to top them up rather than refinance the whole existing banking connection. So it's not going to be the answer for everybody, and the terms might reflect the fact that the business isn't in a great shape. So personal guarantee, it may not in fact be within the CBIL scheme that they get their assistance. It might be outside on those lenders' traditional terms. So additional security, personal guarantees, they might be required. But there is a market out there and there are lenders out there.
And I guess in the meantime, people have got to use their VAT and their taxes that they're not paying as probably their only other source of income, haven't they? The source of funding.
I think yes, I think that's to be considered. I think that the point of the alternate finance market is rather like we used it before COVID-19, is that it can be used as a stepping stone because it moves that bit quicker, and it is a bit more fluid, and it takes a more pragmatic view of a transaction. But you pay for the benefit. You pay pay for the cost of that. The benefit is that gets the business over this lump in the cold light of day when everything's calmed down and there is a need to look at alternate banking. Then you can do it in the calm of post now, rather than trying to do it now when you're just going to have harassed bank managers both sides, which clearly will only drive a more negative response rather than a more positive response if someone has time to properly look at a transaction.
That makes sense.
My feeling is that in the short to medium term, the more distressed customers that we're going to see as a turnaround practice will be those who require bridging. So they aren't businesses that are necessarily bound to fail. They aren't businesses where an insolvency cannot be avoided. They're businesses that need basically a bridge, and they need to get away from their existing banking relationship for whatever reason. Yeah,
it's some short-term alternate finance is the best description that sums up that situation for that particular client. And they have to look at it from that perspective, and they have to consider it from that perspective. You know, when we look at a transaction like that, we're looking at it from our perspective in terms of where is the opportunity to exit. We understand that taking on that any kind of debt at the kind of levels you're potentially talking about in terms of interest cost needs to consider how do we come out the other side and what are those options. Because clearly if there is no exit strategy, then all we're doing is moving the problem down the line. But if there's genuinely an option, then clearly that's where the short-term alternate finance guys can come in and just provide that support that you're not going to get from a high street.
And how does your average business go about accessing second-tier funding? Is that normally through a broker who would help them find the right place to go?
Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds like the obvious thing, we would say that, but actually there's probably 200 or more alternative finance lenders out there. And so for a commercial broker to keep in touch with all of those is a full-time job. So if anybody's running a business and they can manage to monitor the alternative finance market and know exactly where to go, have the best chance of success, it's a tough order. So go to a commercial finance broker, one that's registered with the NACFB, one that's registered with the FCA. Not all finance brokers ask for fees up front. We don't. And just be careful who you're using, and make sure they've got the right sort of expertise.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And Robin, I know there's been changes or talks of changes in insolvency law for temporary restrictions. Are you still seeing businesses put into administration or stopping trading through lack of funds? Because obviously we've seen the big high street retailers go. Oh, Robin, hello, you there?
Don't know what happened there, because it was a great answer from Nick, and then all of a sudden everything froze.
You didn't hear my great question?
No.
Oh, a shame.
Okay, I was saying, there's been obviously talks of changes in insolvency law, sort of temporary restrictions. Are you seeing yet businesses going into receivership or administration as a result of this? And obviously we've seen the big high street names go, but are you seeing the smaller businesses being put into administration yet or not?
No, not really, and neither are my contacts.
Okay.
At the moment, the situation seems to be that any that were probably in the pipeline for some sort of restructuring or insolvency process, for instance, a rescue process like an administration or a company voluntary arrangement or a combination of those, or in fact a liquidation, that if they were in that position before, chances are all that's happened is government intervention has kicked the can down the road, but there will at some point be an appointment. Likewise, changes to, disruption in the winding up arena, firstly with the courts putting a block stay on proceedings until they could work out the technology and so on, and also the changes that are coming in now to deal with a moratorium and support for businesses that face a winding up procedure or would normally face a winding up procedure, means that the can is being kicked down the road a bit. Okay. I think those that were more or less viable beforehand would now be taking advice. That the boards will be well advised to act prudently and consider the directors' duties and so on, and try and manage their way through the situation. I think the longer this goes on, the more of those businesses we'll see looking at the very least rescue options like an administration or a company voluntary arrangement. Okay. But at the moment, no big movement.
Okay, that's good to hear. Well, good to hear in one way. In other words, things aren't collapsing quickly. People certainly still treading water. Just one last point. When we talk about a viable business, we all know what that means, but a business owner just running a £500,000, £1 million business, what does it mean when the banks are talking about being a viable business? What are they looking for?
I guess when they ask that question as part of the application process, it's demonstrating that the 31st of December 2019, the business was viable. So if you can turn to a set of recent stat accounts produced in 2019 that shows the business is viable and some up-to-date management figures, your bank account's operating in a satisfactory fashion, you're showing that you're paying your creditors when you need to, I think that's, and generating some sort of profit that shows you're sustainable as a business, then you've ticked that box. I think the more challenging side of things is looking forward to post-COVID, where you've got to be able to demonstrate that you're a business that's capable of servicing your existing debt and the new debt that you're taking on as part of the loan application. And I suppose the comment I picked up at something I was listening to earlier this week was the banks are required to make a brief assessment of your future ability to trade. Now, I guess that's because nobody knows. So there's not a lot of point applying too many strict rules around that. It's a case of what looks sensible. So I'd say to anybody that's putting together an application, argue your case. Okay. Argue your case as to how you see your industry, your sector being affected by the downturn. Don't for a moment think that turnover is going to switch back on and there aren't going to be issues, because there are. But you need to rationalise and explain why you've taken the view that you have done in the forecasts. Expect there are going to be some supply chain issues. Expect that the demand's not going to come straight back into the market, expect that cash flow is not going to suddenly trigger into back to normal sort of overnight, and build those considerations in, demonstrate that you've thought about it. Because if you've got a reasonable case, it may not be the right case because nobody knows what the future is going to hold, but if it's a case that you can take to the bank and they look at it and go, well, it shows you thought about it, it shows it's reasonable, we can't really argue against it with any more authority than you've argued for it, then I think it's about building your own case for your own business.
So when that goes to underwriting, at least then they've got an argument for the case.
Yeah.
And if you don't provide that information, they're going to have to make their own assumptions.
That's right. And there will be some post-drawdown audit sort of externally, and the banks will be aware of that. So they'll need some sort of case on their file that they can justify what they've done. And actually, in the event that if the business was to fail and the bank has to call up on the guarantee, again, there could be some audit from the British Business Bank. They'll want to be able to demonstrate that the action they took seemed entirely reasonable at the time, so that that guarantee is not put in jeopardy. So give them the information. That's
really useful. I've got to say, some cracking information there, guys. That's going to be really helpful to a lot of people. Robin?
I was just going to say, to follow on from that, that ties in with the government's moves to deal with directors' wrongful trading. It accepts that in these circumstances, a director doing his or her best for the business, assessing the future viability of the business, and on that basis, and preferably with advice, deciding to continue to trade, would avoid the scrutiny that would normally come under a wrongful trading action by a subsequently appointed liquidator. The only caveat to that is that what they haven't changed is they haven't changed the fraudulent trading criteria, and they haven't relaxed any of the other directors' fiduciary duties, which in a distressed situation are more towards the creditors of the company than they are to the company itself and its shareholders. So there is that relaxation, but it's on the basis of a good, honest assessment with all the information available of the business's viability. Those who cynically attempt to access funding that they know that the company's never going to be able to repay, they will still be caught.
Right. Okay. And just on the flip side of that, last week when we talked last Wednesday, we were talking about businesses who are going, oh well, I'm going to apply for the CBILs anyway, stick some cash in the bank, stick it in premium bonds. I presume that those guys aren't getting past the door, are they?
No, they're getting.
You can't demonstrate need, you're not getting the cash.
No, that's right. I mean, it's a key function of the loan application process is that you need to demonstrate that you've taken all steps that you can do to mitigate the amount of loan that you're looking for. Sorry, I lost my thread there. What was the second part of the question?
Just that businesses who, if they are going in asking for funds they don't need, they're being rejected.
Sorry, so I was coming from the cash flow actually demonstrates the amount of funding that they require. So that they've taken all steps, and the actual amount required is demonstrated by the cash flow, not a wish to buy premium savings bonds.
Great. Anybody else got anything to add to that? I think that's been really a very, very concise update of where things are.
I think the only thing I would add is that if a client is nervous of the bank process and not getting through the bank process, there is no harm, and we would almost possibly recommend considering applying to one of the alternate providers, either within CBILs or without, or outside. The logic being that you've got your backup plan moving already. If you don't need it, it falls by the wayside. If you get your bank funding, smashing, you've got it at the right rate, right price, or whatever. But you're not then starting the whole process again. So that if someone is genuinely on the borderline themselves in their own gut feel that I'm not sure if this is going to get through or not, or I'm not sure how the bank's going to view this, then I would seriously suggest that they consider applying to another provider, either that, as I say, within CBILs or without, so that they've got some backup plan themselves, so that if the number one falls away, we're already moving forward into the other option.
That's great.
And I think, at the end of the day, you know, I'm going to say it, but a broker will help them and direct them in the right direction. You know,
and like
the reality is there's 2 or 3 brokers within the Corona team. You know, okay, we're sat here talking today, but there's more than one that's available. If you go on the NACFB website, you can get hold of, I think there's about 2,000 odd there.
Mm-hmm.
Do your own research, get your own comfort around that, and then exactly the same as you would with any other supplier, and then use that option to tap into other ways of potentially getting to finance.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. I would endorse that. Sorry, Serena. I would endorse that. And if Nick hadn't said it, I would have said it. We see with clients that those who take a targeted approach to refinancing their facilities have a better chance of success. And that targeting comes through their own ability to research the market, or to take the insights of somebody who knows the market. So, you know, it's the same as with everything. You take advice, you act on that advice, you've got a better chance.
Yeah. And Robin, just if people are sitting here thinking like, I know I can't get bank funding, I don't know how I'm going to fill this gap, I just don't know where to turn next. What are their options?
Well, there are options. I mean, one of them is to take the sort of advice that turnaround professionals, either accountants or lawyers or both, give as to the viability of the business, to assess how much time they've got, how much financial runway they have, because the amount of time they have will determine the options they have. But the guys have already spoken about alternative sources of finance, either within the government scheme or without, bridging possibilities. But there's also the question of whether or not equity can be found. We've already had examples of inquiries either from businesses that are in a very good position and are looking to either take a stake in other businesses or acquire them. Not always a great option, but it's one that's there. The other thing that we're seeing is there are some businesses, again with cash, but who also want to ensure that they can secure supply from their supply chain. And what would normally happen is they would those customer businesses would look down the supply chain, see a vulnerability, and then negotiate perhaps better terms, cash on delivery, payment terms, things like that, in order to improve the cash flow of their supplier and thus ensure security of supply. But the other thing that they're looking at doing as an alternative is potentially taking an equity stake in that business. Not necessarily one that allows them to influence decision making, but one that allows them to shore up that business from a capital point of view, and then also, should that business succeed in the future, get a bit of a reward for that investment. So it's a moral and a financial advantage, I suppose.
That's a very interesting point. I'd heard from Barry Lee this week that the surprising number of businesses still out there looking to buy companies, a lot of deals still going through.
Yep.
And I guess that if those things aren't an option, they just need to talk to their accountant as quickly as they can, don't they, in terms of options, because they'll point them in the right direction.
The earlier people take advice from professionals who know what they're talking about, I would say that. The earlier people take advice, the more time they've got to work the options, and there's a kind of sliding scale of desirability in those options as well. More time you've got, the better the options are, the cheaper they are, the easier they are to implement. Yeah,
got it. Well, I think that covers a lot, guys. Thank you ever so much. Really, really appreciate your time and your input on that. I think that's just a lovely overall summarisation, I think, of where we are.
All right.
Same time next week then, see how things have moved.
Good to see you guys.
And you. I'll just stop the recording now, okay? Okay.